Story number one. I was already on edge when the radio cackled to life that night. The weather was turning, snow swirling in the headlights and the icy wind hitting my tired face every time the window creaked. They advised us on the forecast. Blizzard, gusts picking up. No one in their right mind would want to be out patrolling on a night like this. I wanted to say no, but when dispatch mentioned a reported accident on Old Darrow Path, I grumbled and grabbed my jacket. Old Darrow Path cut off from the main road a few miles east. Even daylight made it bleak. Trees bent low, fences long collapsed. Finding it in a snowstorm was something else. As I drove, flakes furled across my windshield in dizzying patterns. The main road had the occasional lamp, but the turnoff vanished into murk. I just rolled onto the dark bit of road, letting my eyes adjust when I slammed the brakes. There was a woman standing right in front of the truck. No coat, just a light dress hanging from shoulder to shin, dirty white, hair matted over her face. Even in the gloom, I could see how thin she was. Skin stretched awkwardly over her bones. She hardly seemed alive. The way she stood, unmoving, I honestly thought I was looking at a ghost. Instinct took over. I called out, but my voice was too shaky, muffled by the glass. She didn't move. Then out of nowhere, a bat hurled itself at the truck window. Glass rattled, wings thrashed in the snow-speckled dark, then gone. It took my breath away, and by the time I'd flung the door open, the road was empty again. No woman, no bat, just a dead silence pressing in. I kept the engine running, nerves jittery. Just off the path, I caught sight of a house. It was shrouded in shadow, but there, the second floor, a flicker of pale light. The kind of light that pulses rhythmically, like someone pacing near a lamp. I crept up the drive, the snow crunching underfoot. No sign of the accident, no car, no debris, not a scrape in the powder. I rang the bell. The wind might have carried off the sound. I waited, but nothing. Just as I turned, annoyed and more than a little creeped out, a faint metallic clicking echoed, the door swinging slightly open, on creaky hinges. Every instinct screamed for me to get back to the truck, but official duty is hard to shake. I went inside, calling out for anyone. Resident, victim, witness. No voices, not even the scuffle of shoes. Then something hit me, a stench so raw I gagged into my scarf. Think rotting meat, sickly sweet, thickening the air. Rot. Death. Maybe a dead animal trapped somewhere, my mind offered hopefully. My flashlight beam scanned the wide foyer. Wallpaper malted with mildew, slanted stairs climbing up. Footprints in the dust? None. No lights except on the second floor, where a hallway lamp flickered, then died out as I watched. The air was colder inside than outside, and the snow kept piling against frosted windows. I pushed further in. Every breath brought that smell deeper into my throat. At times, it seemed like someone was in the next room, just beyond the light, feet scuffing, the creak of floorboards. And then, it passed behind me, sudden cold on my ear, the faintest brush past my jacket. I spun around, nothing. Flashlight only catching emptiness and dust motes. I heard the woman before I saw her, a shriek, raw and echoing, not even close to human. It rose through the house, sharp, then cut off. Logic told me pipes, maybe the wind, but my body tensed for something I couldn't name. I stalked up the spiral staircase, feet slipping slightly on the warped wood, badge heavy on my chest. Halfway up, my hair lifted with static, and suddenly, hot breath, wet, fetid, hit my right ear. Cold fingertips pressed between my shoulder blades, ice cold and inhumanly strong. And then, shove. My boots slid. For a moment I hung there, weirdly weightless, before slamming down the stairs. A white flash, skull bouncing against the banister, world spinning. I opened my eyes just once and saw her, the woman from the road, now hovering inches above me, mouth stretched far too wide, teeth yellow and sharp, her hollow black eyes locked on mine. Not human, not anymore. For a second she looked almost satisfied. That was when everything went black, cold and hollow, like the house had swallowed me whole. I woke on cracked, frozen ground, aching all over. My colleagues crouched over me, bundled tight against the wind, radios squawking. One of them pressed my pulse, his flashlight nervously flicking around the empty field. There was a sickly sweet stench, but now it clung to my own coat and hair, nauseating and thick. They said they'd tracked my patrol car by GPS, found me unconscious in the middle of this barren patch. An old sign, half buried under the snow, marked the edge of the property. According to them, no house stood here. Hadn't been for years, a fire took it, eating up the old place and the people who used to live there. The record said the house burned in the winter. The family never made it out. No woman reported on the road that night. No accident. The path was empty. I tried shakily to ask about the house, the lights, the scream, the woman. They shook their heads, faces pale in the morning light, just relieved I was alive. I could think of dozens of explanations. Maybe I'd slid, banged my head, and dreamed it all in the frozen night. The stench? Maybe old ashes or something caught in my clothes as I passed through the ruins, stirred up by the wind. That's what I tell myself every night while lying awake, haunted by the memory of her eyes. Dark holes in the skull of a woman, a grin far too wide, promising she'd be back, that she's just waiting outside for another night. Some things are best left unsolved, I suppose. I still do the job, but I drive past Old Darrow Path without ever looking back, not even when a flicker of light ghosts behind the tree line, edging the burnt snow. Story number 2, I took the job because I needed the money, and after months of scouring hospital notice boards and online forums, it paid better than anything else I'd seen. Home nurse for a shock trauma patient, secluded address somewhere along an old forest road. I didn't mind the night shifts at first, nothing but the rustle of wind in massive oaks, cool air thick with the scent of moss and wet bark. But the isolation pressed in, the house itself sagging with years of silence, shadows lingering in hallways where sunlight barely reached. On my first night of live-in duty, I roamed the creaking floors after midnight. That was when I first saw her, not as a patient, not as a fragile woman racked by paralysis, but standing at the top of the winding wood stairs. Her figure was thin, the hospital gown hanging from bony shoulders. She simply stared into the dim living room, and within seconds I realized her eyes glinted an impossible red in the lightless hall. The chill that ran over my back felt alive. I screamed, the sound echoing up the walls and into the hollows of the house. By the time the owner thudded down from his attic room and hurried to her side, I stood speechless. We found her on her bed, breath shallow, eyelids closed, so still I wondered if I'd imagined everything. The owner looked at me with tired concern, as if I were the patient now, voice lowered to calming tones. In the deep woods, reality seems to warp very subtly, and I began to wonder if my nerves had simply conjured a phantom under the strain of isolation. The next morning was washed in fog. I checked on the woman after the owner left for his office job in the nearby town. The air in her room hung stale, curtains drawn against the scratch of branches on the glass. The woman's head lay fixed at an angle, her eyes unnervingly wide and pointed at the ceiling, not blinking. I began to tidy, careful not to knock anything over. Then the vase beside her bed, set on a sturdy nightstand, teetered and crashed to the floor, glass shattering in a jagged burst. I jumped, heart pounding, looking for any explanation. Open window, a tremor, an animal scurrying nearby. But the glass hadn't so much as shivered under my watch, and the woman had not moved at all. It was as if the air itself had shifted, invisible hands pushing at the world. I patched the mess with shaking hands, the silence of the house now far more complete. That night, as the hush of the woods pressed in and the house groaned its old wooden groans, I locked myself in the guest room. The hours blurred. I must have drifted into a nightmare half-sleep, because I awoke to steady rhythmic taps just above my head, delicate at first like thin bones knocking. I froze in the bed. The tapping continued, a patient insistence. I remembered a childish logic. If I didn't respond, it might go away. But curiosity and dread wrestled in my chest. I leaned forward and forced myself to look through the keyhole. The pale of her face appeared first. Her lips were dark, pressed together, and she was humming, a wavering, tuneless melody. The pitch wound into my ear, almost mechanical. Her eyes, bright with that same unholy red, flickered in the slit of light between the door and her face. Glassy, like animal eyes in a predator's den. The urge to scream was so immediate and sharp it caught in my throat, and I pressed back against the bed, hands shaking until the taps faded away and silence fell once more. Come morning, rationality returned, clammy and desperate. I tried to find reasons: sleep deprivation, the play of headlights on glass, echoes carried by the old structure. But nothing sat quite right. Nothing explained the silent presence, the patient humming, the way I could feel eyes on me even as I moved through the rooms. With the owner gone for work, I was left alone with her on the third day. In the kitchen, the tap stuttered as I washed fruit, and then, inexplicably, the water ran red. I stared in blank horror for a moment, my hands stained, before shutting off the tap as if that would erase what I'd seen. Even the pipe seemed to moan. An instant later, one of the old windows slammed open as though struck by a fist, the chill air flooding the kitchen and making me gasp. On the table, the freshly washed apples lay in a small puddle resembling diluted blood. Logically, rusty pipes can cause this, I kept telling myself. Perhaps I nicked my own finger, and in my panic, magnified the whole event. But logic didn't warm the air or still the tremor in my hands. That evening, when dusk pressed against the windows, the house seemed to shudder and close in. Searching for the patient's medication in the study, the owner's instructions written in thick, shaky letters, I locked the oak door behind me. I remember checking the latch twice. The walls here were lined with brittle paperbacks and tall, brooding bookcases. Halfway through rummaging the drawers, the doorknob began to twist. It squeaked, slow and deliberate, and then the door edged open. For a moment, the shadowed hallway yawned out at me, impossibly empty but tense with a presence I couldn't see. A low, sticky sensation made me look down. My shoes were slick, caught in a congealed pool of blood, or something like it, soaking into the carpet. The metallic smell thrust itself into my sinuses, stomach flipping. As I staggered back, she appeared a few feet away, her hair hanging around her shoulders, mouth hanging open in a soundless shriek. The knife she clutched gleamed under the overhead lamp, her gaze boring into me. She moved with a sudden, jerky motion, darting. I slipped, my head spinning, and bolted. The hallway stretched in impossible angles, my panic making the world tilt. Every doorknob stuck until, finally, one door swung open, and I flung myself inside, falling against heavy furniture. I heard scratching at the wood and felt the sting of a shallow cut on my forearm. Sharp, burning, the edge of reality and nightmare blurring. When morning finally came, a dull, milky light seeping through the dirty glass, the house was eerily quiet. The owner greeted me at the bedroom door, asking for an update. He calmly said the woman had died overnight, lungs filling slowly as she slept. The police pronounced it natural. Most people saw only a sad, bedridden woman, gone without struggle. The mess was gone. No blood on the floor, no red water in the pipes, no knife in the hallway. But the cut remained on my arm, a thin, unmistakable line, a wound that burned when I scrubbed it later in my apartment. In the weeks after, I found myself listening for footsteps at night or the hush of someone humming behind a locked door. I never took another home shift, and I keep my bedroom door firmly bolted after dark. There's no evidence to prove any of it happened. All the explanations, trauma, exhaustion, tricks of light, remain plausible. Still, every night when the air grows thick, I sense the weight of her gaze somewhere inside the shadows of my own home. I don't go out of my room. I don't dare look through the keyhole. Story number 3. I was 22, working through my 5th semester at university, watching my savings circle the drain faster than a sinkhole. The night shift at Hollow Pines Gas Mart wasn't glamorous, just a cinder block box on the side of the old county road, pelted daily by rain and cut through by truckers who never made eye contact. My best friend Leah got the job with me. We called ourselves Graveyard Girls. The pay was decent, and between her laughter and the constant stream of coffee, the night hours seemed almost tolerable. It was a Thursday, early November, with rain grinding down the windows like sandpaper. Leah was restless from the moment she arrived, clenching and unclenching her fists around the sleeves of her coat. She told me she needed to meet her boyfriend. It sounded urgent, so I shrugged and told her I'd lock up. I didn't think twice. That's how trust worked between us. The station was always quiet after 10, save for drifters grabbing instant ramen and forgotten locals filling up on diesel. I kept the radio on, the volume low, an oldies station with a bit of static that blurred into the rain's white noise. At 11:02 p.m., impossible to forget because I spent the next hour replaying it, I heard a sharp, brazen honk right outside the storefront, the kind that shakes you awake, claws up your spine. I whipped my head around, staring out at the parking lot, expecting blinding headlights. There was nothing. The only car for miles was my own, veiled in sheets of rain. The road glistened empty, black and flat, stretching beyond the reach of the one flickering streetlight. I tried to wave off my nerves, blaming rain static and maybe a low rattle from the station's ancient HVAC. My hands shook anyway. That's when it started. A rising staccato buzz from the sign outside, a deep hum that made my teeth ache, then a searing pop as the entire sign blacked out. The interior lights followed suit, flickering with a nervous energy before muting to a ghostly half-glow. Shadows twisted up the aisles and clung to the ceiling. The radio shrieked into static, a sound so violent I nearly dropped the mug I was holding. I tried to reset the dial, nothing but white noise. I laughed too loudly, trying to convince myself it was just the storm jumbling the circuits. Sometime after came the footsteps, deliberate, heavy. I heard them thudding from the farthest part of the store, the single customer bathroom at the end of the last aisle, which just minutes before I had locked for cleaning. The echo of boots on grimy linoleum carried down the aisles and set every hair on my arms upright. I grabbed the key from the hook and crept over, my heart against the inside of my ribs. My breath fogged the metal doorknob. The lock was still engaged. When I opened the door, the fluorescent bulb inside stuttered to life. Nothing. Not even a drifting draft, just the faintest tang of citrus cleaner. I chalked it up to my over-caffeinated brain, or perhaps plumbing vibrations, trying to reason my way through the quickening in my chest. That's when the back doorbell rang. I exhaled in relief, putting on my friendly night clerk face as a customer walked in. He was soaked, tall, gaunt as if he hadn't slept for weeks. His skin was papery, washed gray, eyes ringed so deep it made him look empty inside. He kept his hands in his pockets, voice hushed when he asked about snacks. My brain stuck on how he looked like he'd stepped out of a freezer and on how the lights seemed dimmer with him inside. I pointed him to the snack aisle and returned to the counter. He didn't take a basket. I didn't hear wrappers rustle or feet shuffle. 30 minutes trickled by. His image haunted the shop's reflections and quiet. I did inventory, checked the cooler, wiped the same spot on the counter over and over. The clock ticked 11:38. No beep at the register, no footsteps, no conversation. I finally walked the aisles. No customer. Just an echo of cold air trailing me past the candy racks and the freezer's condensation. The bathroom was open, still empty. The pulsing in my ears grew louder. I checked every possible exit. He hadn't walked past me, and the steel back door was still deadbolted. It didn't make sense. That's when I saw it. On the outside of the big glass window near the snack aisle, distinct, muddy footprints. Human but odd, with a long, splayed toe as if barefoot, but impossibly high up, smearing down the glass at shoulder level, like someone had climbed through the window rather than pushed open the doors. I stared at the prints, not wanting to breathe. Rain like icy shotgun pellets on the other side. My chest stuttered. Panic crawled over my neck. I could have left. My keys were by the register, but my mind kept circling reason. I must have missed him, or maybe someone had come in for the bathroom and left without paying, or a truck had thrown up mud and I was seeing things. My thoughts were interrupted by movement outside. Through the sheets of rain, I recognized Leah's shape. Same coat, same bounce in her step. She was waving, calling to me, her voice stretched and tinny through the storm as if from underwater. But her hand jerked up and down, too rhythmic, her head twisting mechanically. Her smile was wrong, too wide, teeth too uniform in the night's blue half-light. She said she needed help with her truck. I convinced myself it really was Leah, and she wouldn't leave me alone right before midnight. I left my post stepping into the rain. The cold bit at my skin, water cutting through my clothes. She was standing in the center of the empty road, waving urgently, her outline blurred by distance and downpour. I kept getting closer, my vision tunneling on her dark figure. Suddenly, a sharp voice pierced the fog. I heard my own name, clear, familiar. At the same instant I turned, headlights exploded to my left. A tractor trailer roared past, its wind and noise skimming the skin of my face, so close that I stumbled back into the ditch water. Heart hammering, I looked up to see Leah by the gas station entrance, out of breath and soaked, staring at me like I'd lost my mind. She saw me nearly step into the road and said her truck had broken down earlier, so she'd gone home, only to find me walking toward a dead highway, face slack, eyes unfocused. Inside, the station was normal. Radio back, lights stable, no prints on the glass, no trace of the pale man. I watched Leah check the aisles, then watched me, brows knit with something between worry and pity. I still work the day shift, but I won't go near that store at night. I still think about that night and wonder if the cold, the dark, the pressure of long hours just tricked my mind. Maybe I hallucinated, or the rain played tricks, muddling shapes and sounds, But I know this. I won't follow anyone into the dark, not even my own best friend. Not ever again. Story number 4. I never pictured myself as someone who'd be shaken by any of this. My job put me out in the woods alone on most nights, sometimes for hours, sometimes until dawn cracked the darkness apart. In all those years as a park ranger, my fears were only practical. Forgotten tourists, sudden storms, the rare wild animal that strayed too close. There was always a reason, an explanation if you looked for it. Ghosts were for tourists or the pages of paperbacks at the gas station. The night that's been haunting my mind started like any other. It was late, past midnight, my boots threading through blankets of fallen leaves. Their crunch sounded sharp in the quiet, and the air was thick with the high whining of summer insects. It was routine to walk the perimeter, eyes peeled for illegal campers, wayward teenagers, or lost hikers. I wasn't thinking about anything unusual, just following the well-worn path by habit. Yet gradually I felt the sensation you try to rationalize away. A prickly feeling that I wasn't alone. When I stopped, my footsteps silenced, I thought I heard a corresponding crunch pause behind me. Turning quickly, of course, there was nothing, just the familiar trees and gray shadows. Maybe it was my own footsteps echoing off trunks, the way sound does sometimes in dense woods. I convinced myself and moved on. Another 10 minutes in, the ever-present buzz that underscored these dark hours cut out. Not faded, not softened, just stopped. The night was abrupt and unnatural, the silence hanging heavy, making my own breath sound ragged. It was then that I saw the oak tree. It's an ancient thing. Locals claim it's the oldest tree in the park, with a base so wide 2 men can't wrap their arms around it. Down at its roots were 2 dolls. They weren't children's dolls, not really. Something about them was too adult, too precise. The faces were uncannily detailed with glassy eyes and faint, knowing smiles. Dressed up like a man and a woman from a faded photograph, their limbs were twisted at odd angles. Ankles bent backward, arms at impossible rotations, as though they'd tried to escape being molded and failed. I swear their eyes followed me even in the darkness, their laughs silent and yet somehow deeply audible in my mind. It felt like I was being mocked or invited, somewhere between the two. I forced myself forward. It should have taken a few steps to reach the tree, my flashlight beam jerking uneasily across roots and leaves. But it was as if the air had telescoped. Every time I moved, the tree and the dolls seemed to inch further away. I lost track of how many times my boots struck the same outcropping, the landscape subtly warping around me. Turning to look behind, I couldn't recognize the undergrowth. I couldn't even say which way I'd come. The park's usual clearings and trails had deserted me. The crunch of leaves now sounded deeper, mixed with noises I'd never heard before. A faint, rhythmic ticking, metallic and unplaceable. As I bent down to pick up the dolls, I was seized by a stunning compression across my throat. Invisible fingers, or something like them, closing slowly, with deliberate intent. My vision went speckled at the edges. Then with a soundless flicker, 2 heavy branches dropped from the oak above, swinging down with effortless speed. They wrapped around my wrists, yanking me upwards so quickly that the world spun, and I dangled there, helpless. I kicked and twisted, the bark scraping my skin, a taste of copper lining my mouth. The branches were impossibly strong, yet warm and flexible beneath my palms, almost like muscle, not wood. My mind raced for an explanation. Maybe I'd stepped into a tangle of hidden vines, and adrenaline had warped my perceptions. Maybe I was in the throes of a panic-induced hallucination. Yet the pressure on my throat only tightened, each shallow gasp sharper than the last. My hands fumbled through my pockets until I found my utility blade. Half blinded, I hacked at the woody coils. There was no sap, but a slow, almost pulsing movement under the bark. I cut harder, the metal biting, and then I dropped, the branches letting go, sending me sprawling to the forest floor with knees and elbows splayed. For a blink, I saw the dolls watching with their glassy, lopsided eyes, lips twisted further into grins, as if they were pleased with the outcome. The woods behind me, directionless and wrong, I scrambled and ran. Branches whipped at my face. With every panicked stride, I expected to feel those invisible hands again, or to step on earth so soft it swallowed me whole. When I finally burst out onto a recognizable access road, every sound, the trickles of distant water, the drone of insects, flooded instantly back into my ears. My cabin that night felt hostile. I locked every window, but sleep was impossible. The room was airless, oppressive, and as soon as I started drifting off, I felt a tightening on my neck again. Impossible, but real. I snapped awake, bolting upright, lungs desperate for air. The room was unchanged, ordinary, safe. The redness of dawn crept across my bedspread. It would have been the kind of nightmare you shake off, except that when I glanced at myself in the mirror, there was a ring of bruises on my throat, deep red and sickly purple, in the unmistakable shape of fingerprints. My knees were bloodied, gravel still embedded, though I couldn't recall falling anywhere but in the woods. I live alone. The doors were still locked, the windows untouched. I spent the next day convincing myself of plausible reasons. Perhaps I'd had a sleepwalking episode triggered by stress, or the faintness in the woods had been a panic attack. Maybe the dolls were part of some elaborate prank. If I'd truly fainted and thrashed about, maybe I'd bruised my own throat in the process, though deep down I doubted it. The image of those dolls, joints twisted, eyes laughing, and the impossible feeling of warm, living wood lingered in my thoughts long after. I still walk the woods, the dawn always a little chillier than before, the silence deeper. I don't say what I saw out loud. There's always a reason, I remind myself. There must be. But every so often, in the thickest shadows of the trees, something watches. Something waits, just out of sight, and I find myself walking a little faster, even when I know I'm alone. Or at least, I think I am. Story number 5. We get sent out all hours, all places. Underpasses, empty lots, skeletons of buildings no one's remembered in a decade. But that particular job last autumn was worse than most. The city wanted all the old bridges checked, especially the Marrow Street span, spanning a shallow, slow river, all graffiti and crumbling rails. Most guys hated working it. Bad cell service, too close to the woods, too many old stories about drownings or lost kids. Me, I never put much stock in superstition. Give me a job, I'd do it. So there I was, a little after midnight, with only one other guy, Carlos, making stupid jokes and shuffling his feet. By then, the fog from the river had already crept up, cold and sticky, crawling into my sleeves. We worked mostly in silence after the first hour. I always liked being under the bridge, the way the world upstairs felt far away, the city lights only smears between dark girders. Tonight, though, everything felt off. The water moved slower than usual, glassy, thick swallowing sound instead of amplifying it. The air smelled of copper, not just mud. I chalked it up to autumn rot and chemicals leaching from all that iron above us. We started at opposite ends, hauling bags of gray caulk in a bucket each. He called out. His flashlight had crapped out, asked to borrow mine. I handed it over, then he said he'd run back to the truck for an extra. It would just be a couple of minutes. I told him to go. The last stretch was my job anyway. That left me under the bridge alone. My work light on a post, lantern yellow in the thick dark. The concrete wall in front of me sweated with old rain, everything clammy, making each strike of my chisel spark grit and dust. The sound was fine at first, steady, the way it had always been, but around the 8th joint, something shifted. My chisel started to stick, like the old caulking was glue, and every chip raised a fine white mist, powder hanging viscous in the yellow light. At first I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, eyes blurry from squinting too long. Then the hairs on my neck stood up. The river didn't sound right. Instead of flowing or lapping, it went silent, like the world had paused. Air gone tight and old. I turned, felt the icy crust of fear gather on my tongue. At the far edge of the work lights pool, someone stepped out from behind the 3rd pillar. I say someone because it was shaped like a person at first. The size, the posture. But in that strange yellow haze, I couldn't see any details. Not even skin, not even clothing or hair. Just the darkness between things. Like the empty space when headlights cut through mist. Less the figure of a person than a subtraction of light, a moving void. Its feet, if it had feet, barely made a sound on the slick concrete. I called out, voice louder than I'd meant, half angry to cover the fact I was afraid. We were working here after all, and trespassers could mean trouble. But both the river and that thing were silent. It didn't move, didn't flinch or step back or answer. It just stood, shifting almost imperceptibly in its lack of light, as if it was made of wet velvet, sucking all the brightness from the lamp. That's when my headlamp flickered. Not the big work lamp, just the one on my forehead, a stuttering, convulsive sputter that turned the inside of my eyelids into a strobe. I felt a pressure in my chest as if the air suddenly thickened or something heavy had slammed into my sternum but left no mark. My heart pounded so loud it rang in my ears, listening to a silence even insects didn't break. There was a bitter taste on my tongue, something like iron or burnt hair. Everything seemed to slow down. The shadow tilted its head, impossibly slow, and the light bent around it, lines shifting, like water seen through a warped window. I took a step back. On instinct, I reached for my chisel again. The only sound was my own breath, rasping. The pillar beside me trickled a fine line of black water onto the toes of my boots. Just then, far away, Carlos slammed the truck's door. The noise sliced through the air, shattering whatever hold the darkness had. My headlamp stuttered again and came back on. I flicked my gaze to the pillar, but the shape, whatever it was, had vanished. Only an impression, a darkness that felt like an afterimage pressed into my retinas, remained. The river noise started up again, louder, trying to fill the hole left by that silence. I scanned the area, half expecting a prank or a drifter, but the footprints in the sand told a different story. In the slick, undisturbed mud under the pillar, where driftwood and cans usually mark the tide, there were marks, fresh and very wrong. Like feet, but the toes were stretched out, curling, almost like a handprint pressed into the ground, but elongated and thin, as if something monstrous had knelt there. For a moment I wondered if water had made them, swirling the mud into strange patterns, or if some animal had passed through, otter or raccoon, maybe even a barefoot kid on a dare. But the prints started at the pillar and led nowhere. They just faded into nothing halfway toward the river's black tongue. Carlos showed up, flashlight raised, face pale in its beam. He noticed my expression, but I said nothing. What could I say? He looked around, turned the spotlight on the mud, shouted to see if someone else was there. But there wasn't so much as a ripple on the water or an echo from the pillars. We finished the work, hands shaking, both of us pretending nothing was wrong. But the cold had wormed its way into the core of me, a shrinking in the spine that didn't leave for weeks after. Talking to the cops later, routine for trespassers and vandalism claims, they shrugged. Sometimes local kids come down here for kicks, they said. Sometimes raccoons leave weird prints. Sometimes light does funny things, or somebody squats in the wrong place and you catch their shadow at a bad angle. I wanted to agree. Hell, I needed to agree. Nights are long, bridges are old, and the mind invents things when it's tired. They told me even floodlights can warp a shadow, and I remember nodding, sure, absolutely, that's reasonable. But I couldn't shake the memory of that pressure in my chest, the taste of metal, the world holding its breath around something, standing just at the limit of vision. None of the explanations fit the prints. Too long, too twisted, each toe curved as if grasping for something to pull itself up from the mud. The pillar stayed damp long after, a crust of black around its base that never seemed to dry. These days I call in sick if the midnight shift is at Marrow Street. Sometimes I dream of slick, pale hands pressing out of shadow and into water, and wake with my chest tight, sure I heard something moving through the dark beneath me. If anyone asks, I tell them what the cops said. Animals, kids, shadows, that's all. But I catch myself checking the mirrors for something in the darkness behind me. I stay in the light. Under that bridge, whatever moves between the floodlights still waits, and some part of me knows it isn't done. Story number 6. I always thought I was practical, that if something felt off, there was a logical explanation, even if I didn't have all the facts. After all, you have to be grounded to work a dead-of-night shift with only mannequins for company. I never believed in ghosts, and I'm not about to start. But some things are hard to explain away, no matter how many times you try. I started at the store in late November. Graveyard shift, the kind that boils down to hours of stacking sweaters, unpacking boxes, and battling the boredom and cold that seems to settle deeper in the bones every night. The store emptied out at midnight and didn't unlock again until 7. The only human sound was the distant clatter of the cleaning crew's cart, always gone by 2, and the rough voice of the radio DJ crackling from the back office. Working alone in the big box silence is already unnerving. Light pools on cold tile and shadows hide in the racks. It's strangers still being watched all night, rows of blank-faced mannequins in stiff winter coats, their hands frozen in welcoming gestures. Their eyes never quite meeting yours but always seeming to notice when you glance away. They look lifeless during the day, ludicrous even. In the dead hours, though, they start to seem patient, like they're waiting for some cue. I tried to laugh it off. But then, sometime in mid-December, I started to keep track of the time without meaning to. I'd be unpacking boxes in the back when, every night at 4 a.m., I'd hear a sound. It was nothing at first, a distant scrape that echoed across the tile floors, muffled by the racks and shelving. I assumed at the beginning that it was mice dragging something, or maybe the pipes creaking with cold. But it was heavier than that, a slow, deliberate dragging, like plastic grinding on linoleum. Long, unbroken, and always stopping before I could get close. I'd step out quickly, hands still sticky with tape residue, expecting to see some store fixture tipped over. But everything would look exactly the same. Then one night, the sound was louder, clearer, a scraping shuffle that lasted a good minute, long enough to make the hair stand up on my arms. When I walked out, my heart thudding, I found one of the mannequins, a tall one in a red wool coat, lying face down on the floor. She was 6 feet away from where she'd been when my shift started. Both arms were twisted behind her, deep grooves cut into the wrist where the display pins had been wrenched loose. She'd been standing upright moments ago. I told myself maybe the stand was loose, or vibrations from the overnight subway rattled the floor. The manager, when I told him, just nodded and muttered about static discharge and uneven weight distribution. "It doesn't take much to knock them over," he said. But I checked. The stand was bolted to a thick metal base, heavier than it looked. I had to drag her back, the hard plastic of her limbs squealing against the tiles, and I kept thinking I could hear the faint echo of the night's earlier scraping. A few nights later, around 4, always at 4, I got this itchy, irritated feeling between my shoulder blades, like I was being watched from every corner. Back by the storeroom, I thought I caught a shadow passing behind a rack. Just light changes, I told myself. But when I turned, one of the mannequins seemed to have moved a little closer to the aisle, or maybe it was just how the shadows fell. I started taping the stands to the floor after that. Heavy-duty bright blue packaging tape in wide strips crisscrossed over the bases. Each night I'd check, and each night the tape would still be there, tacky and unbroken. But sometimes a mannequin or two would have shifted, only slightly, so that their eyes caught the glow from the emergency exit sign instead of the ceiling lights. Then, late in February, we had to do the spring display reset. The entire women's section had to be rearranged, jackets packed away, mannequins switched to floral dresses and pastel scarves. I pulled the mannequins one by one off their stands, dragging them to the seasonal aisle. That's when I noticed it. Dirt on the floor underneath 2 of them. Dark, fresh earth, as if someone had scooped a handful from a garden and left it there for me to find. It wasn't from shoes, not tracked in from outside, and the tile was smooth, unbroken. No way for soil to seep up from underneath. There was a long streak, gritty and pale, like something had been dragged across raw ground. I have no explanation for that. The mop picked it up easily enough, but I kept looking back, feeling as if I should see muddy footprints leading somewhere. I tried to check the cameras. I wasted hours scrubbing back and forth through grainy footage from the women's section. All they showed was me restocking, mannequins standing perfectly still. The motion alert logs, too, were empty. No one moved but me, at least according to the system. But then there were other things. A soft clatter near the dressing rooms, plastic tapping, like fingers drumming on glass, but no one there. The overhead lights flickering in sync with the distant rumble of the first subway at 4:02 a.m. Once, while taking inventory, I thought I felt something brush past my leg, cold and hard, like a shin knocking against my ankle. But when I looked down, I was alone. That's when I started paying attention to the clock, and I realized it was always the same. 3:58, uneasy silence. 4 o'clock, the air turns thin and sharp. The hum of the freezers seems louder. 4:03, I turn, and a mannequin is facing the back doors, the blue tape still perfectly wrapped around her feet. I know what the manager says. Old buildings settle, vibrations make things shift. Maybe someone's playing a trick, though I don't know who would bother, or why they'd leave dirt trailing after a plastic figure. I keep telling myself these things. I keep taping down the bases, brushing off the dirt, rotating the figures back toward the aisles. I joke about it when I can. Haunted mannequins, part of the job. But some nights when the wind rattles the freight doors out back and the tile crawls with thin, cold air, I stop stalking and just listen, heart beating fast, eyes flicking over that aching, silent aisle full of plastic faces. There's always just enough reason to explain it away. Still, every night at 4:03, I find myself glancing at the display, at the silent, staring figures. I know they can't move, not really, but sometimes, when I turn my back, I swear I can feel a dozen unblinking eyes watching, waiting, calculating the exact moment to shift. I haven't missed a single night yet. Maybe when the weather warms up, the store will feel less haunted. Maybe the mannequins will stay put, and the dirt will stop appearing. I keep telling myself that. Still, I tape them down every night, all the same. Story number 7. Everybody hears stories about haunted libraries. Ours is supposed to be just cold, a little damp, and sepia with dust. A problem for my sinuses, nothing more. But the basement floor is different. There's a door set in jaded stone, painted with navy oil, and padlocked day and night. They say it leads to the old records vault. Nobody seems to need the records except maybe the archives department, but even the archivist avoids it. I'm a night custodian. I bind my routine with the regular dull rituals. Lights, locks, occasional shelving. The basement run is always last. You could blame the boiler rumblings or the crunch of aged ventilation for the way the air prickles and drops a few degrees as you near that vault. Still, there's something oddly deliberate about the cold, a chill as insistent as a paw on your ankle, especially past 2 in the morning. On several rounds, with the overhead bulbs fussing quiet halos on the concrete, I've heard a sound behind the vault door. The first few times I dismissed it as heat-settling metal, a mouse behind the wall. The more persistent it became, the harder it was to ignore. The scratching, slow, measured, like nails mapping runes or counting seconds. There is a precision to it that distinctly lacks the frantic chaos of rodents. A month ago, curiosity burned hotter than caution. I paused with my trolley and just listened in the hush. I told myself it was some rusty pipe or a trick my mind played to entertain itself in all that silence. After a minute, on a half-crazy whim, I thudded my knuckle against the vault door. The scratching stopped. There was a silence, the particular kind that presses on your ears and makes you aware of your own breath. Then a slow, deliberate scraping, different in pitch from before, as if someone wanted me to notice that they were now using all their nails, dragging down the cellar side of the steel. It made me suddenly cold, sweat prickling under my work shirt. I began to skip that section when I could, but routines have a way of finding you. A week later, still telling myself stories about expanding pipes, I left a fresh yellow pencil by the concrete step leading to the vault door. My own little dare. Just to see, I suppose, if anything would acknowledge it. I remembered, almost as a joke, stories about ghosts gravitating to things left as offerings. The next night, I returned at the same hour. The pencil was gone. No trace. I stared confused, then scanned the floor. There in the dusty powder coating the step was a very clear circle about the size of a salad plate, right where the pencil had been. Not a scuff, not a half-erased swirl, a perfect, slow-drawn circle, pressed as if by a fingertip. I showed the janitor team leader the mark on a morning shift. She shrugged and checked the vault door, then called down to facilities to look for holes or signs of rats. Maybe a rodent had pushed the pencil along and somehow managed to spin in a circle around it, she suggested. Maybe it had rolled under the door and then escaped through a crack. But even she couldn't explain it. Not really. Rats, I thought. But rats can't draw. After that, the door started acting up, right on schedule. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Dust-laden dreams and dread making me look for patterns. 3 times in 2 weeks, at precisely 3:01 a.m., the vault door would shudder. It wasn't a violent slam. If anything, it was like someone on the other side was bracing their full weight and shaking it with both hands. The padlock would rattle, and a sound would reverberate through the hallway, quiet but bone deep. Each time, a coherent, concentrated burst of cold air puffed out from under the door. A chemical freezer cold, nothing like the chill of the rest of the basement. The air stank, not of rot, but of damp newsprint and something mineral, icily metallic, as if the steel itself was sweating. The skeptical part of my brain ran diagnostics. Old ventilation, wind tunnels through nowhere perhaps, a boiler timer malfunctioning, causing a change in pressure and a ghost draft. I filed a facilities report. A maintenance guy came and changed the weather strip under the door and told me to stop watching horror movies. The next night, the puff of air was stronger. My fingertips went white with cold where they brushed the door. Since then, my relationship with the basement is entirely utilitarian. Every so often in that dead patch of morning where nobody is supposed to be awake, I swear I hear not just the scratching, but something softer, like frantic breathing or fabric being pulled tight and then relaxed over and over from behind the steel. Other things happened. Once I found all the bulbs on that floor unscrewed to the edge of contact, so the entire hallway was black as pitch. No staffer had been scheduled to work down there. Another time, my phone, fully charged, fizzled dead the moment I stepped onto the bottom step. The battery returned instantly when I came back up, replicated twice for a skeptical colleague later. And there are the marks. Faint, easily blamed on cleaning equipment or a sliding cart. But if you look, really look, you can sometimes see elongated parallel lines barely pressed into the dust, occasionally converging at the base of the vault door, like the tracks of unusually bony fingers. Whenever I mention this all, even offhand, people laugh. Facilities crew says the padlock is an artifact. They never forgot the day last year when someone tried to force it open for an insurance inventory and found 3 new padlocks stacked on top of the old one. All still locked. Codes changed. The chorus is always the same. There's nothing dangerous down there. It's just the way a place settles at night. Possibly, or maybe the world is just cold and full of lonely spaces that accumulate stories like dust. Maybe I lent those spaces too much attention, but now when I descend to the basement, I don't linger. I never leave anything behind, not even a scuff where I stand. Sometimes, just as I'm leaving, I sense a watching pressure at my back, as if expecting the polite tap of a knuckle, the return of a joke. I've promised myself that I won't knock. Not again. There are things you can explain. A draft, some old lock, a rodent with odd dexterity. But some things, the colder things under your skin and in your breath, you just can't. Nobody else seems to notice the cold, or the air's sharp edge, or the faint, sorrowful echo that sometimes pulses through the foundation. Maybe that's for the best. But ever since the night of the circle in the dust, I leave the vault door alone and walk the rest of my rounds a little faster. I tell myself that all libraries have their secrets. Maybe ours just presses harder, wanting to be let out or let in. So far, I haven't gone back at 3:01 alone, and I don't plan to.